economics in particular is a very linear science. And so what I mean by linear and nonlinear, so you have traditional things are thought to be linear. Let me start by saying this. The world is complex, right? And in order to understand it, we need to simplify it. And how do you simplify it? By separating it into little pieces. You dissect it, you analyze it, and you reduce it in one way or another, right? So this whole tradition of science, especially until the 20th century, was extremely reductionist, looking at taking a really complicated system, turning it into little parts, and then studying the atoms that compose it. And so the idea is that as you're doing that, at the end you are left with all the pieces, and you can understand all the pieces, and that should allow you to understand the whole, right? So you can think of linear systems. For example, you can think of sound as a linear system in the sense that you can hear an orchestra, and the fact that you're hearing the violin over here, that's not going to stop you from hearing the drums on the other side. So all of those things. Now, what happens inside of the person that's listening to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony? It's a completely different thing. And the idea of nonlinearity is that the whole is more than the sum of its parts, right? That if you put yourself into a blender, what's going to come out of it is not you. There's something that's lost in putting yourself into a blender, right? And what is that? It's a kind of structure of the system that you need to capture in some way or another. So back to my point of what complexity means to me is that when I started studying economics, the first sort of serious class that I took, it was intermediate microeconomics, is where past your typical intro to microeconomics and taking it more to the sort of mathematical realm that scholars in economics live in. And there was a question in the test that says, suppose that the marginal utility of income is decreasing. What does that mean? It means that the first dollar that you get is really, really important to you because you were starving, and that as you get more and more money, the utility or happiness that you get from that money is less and less. So if you can imagine a graph where you have how much money you have and how much happiness you're getting out of it, it's going to go up. The more money you get, it's better, but it's going to start kind of like leveling off, right? And linear science is full of these kinds of negative feedback loops into the more and more you get of something, the less and less return you get out of it. So the question in this test was, given that as a fact, imagine that the marginal utility of income is decreasing, are the actions of Robin Hood good for the world? And it was like, I know this one. And I started answering really happily and saying, yes, if you, like Robin Hood, steal from the rich and give it to the poor, how much you're taking away from the rich is not going to matter as much as how much is going to matter to the poor, right? So I'm super excited about my answer, and next week when we get the exams back, it was a 40-point question, and everybody got either 40 points or something around there, and I got a really, really beautiful 0 on my exam. You know, it was like, you absolutely did not understand what it was about. So for the next couple of weeks, I was at my professor's door, just like banging and banging and banging, like, wait a minute, what are you talking about? And he was saying that you can't really measure these kinds of things. And I said, well, maybe we could have an experiment in which we measure this. And after a long time, he was annoyed with me, and he sort of like kind of opened the door to what traditional neoclassical economics really was. And the point was that you cannot really make intrapersonal comparisons, right? I can have a marginal utility of income that's decreasing. You may have it as well, but we cannot compare both our levels, right? It could be that you have Ebenezer Scrooge on the one end that has marginally decreasing utility of income. His last dollar is not as important as his first, but still he cares much more about that last dollar than some hippie out there that even though he has little money, still, even he had a lot of money, little money, he is in a completely different level, so we can't compare them. And that is the essence of linear science, the idea that in linear science, because you can separate things, the way in statistics you can think of events that are independent, right? Like you can study each one of these independently, then because of that, then I can basically, in trying to understand how do people think about the United States getting involved in Libya, I can ask the average voter in the United States, get this person's opinion and then multiply times 300 million people in the United States, and that's going to be public opinion in the United States. And you're allowed to do that because you're simply adding up everybody's opinion, and that's going to add up to the whole, and that's going to be exactly what you're looking for. Now, in nonlinear science, again, the idea is that complexity things are more than the sum of its parts, right? So you can think of a brain, and you can think of this brain being formed by all of these neurons, and even if you think, very kind of materialistically that that's all there is, you absolutely have to agree that when all of these neurons come together, what comes about is a mind. And the mind is in a completely different realm of existence, I would say, than the neurons of the brain, right? They're in a completely different world. So I continued to study economics, but there was something inside of me that said, there's something missing.